Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Bank of Jamaica's quarterly monetary policy press conference, the second for this year. Thank you to those who have taken the time to join us here in person in the auditorium, as well as those who have joined us online. We have with us this morning Governor Richard Biles, Senior Deputy Governor Dr. Wayne Robinson, and Deputy Governors Robert Stennett, Natalie Haynes, Dr. G.D. Lewis, and for the first time, Celeste McCullough. As is the custom, Governor Biles will speak to the bank's latest monetary policy decision in the context of the bank's outlook for inflation and the overall economy against the background of the economy's performance for the last quarter. After Governor Biles has made his address, the floor will be open to allow for the question and answer segment. Governor, over to you.
Thank you, Melanie. Although you have introduced the Deputy Governors and the Senior Deputy Governor, allow me to specially introduce Ms. Celeste McCullough, who is our new General Counsel and Deputy Governor. As of April 1, she took over from Mrs. Karen Chinqui Aiken, who retired, but still works with us specifically on the Twin Peaks project. Melanie introduced the other Deputy Governors and the SDG. If you have any tough questions, they are here. They are our middle order batsmen, so they know how to do the drives and the hooks. So don't be shy in asking the tough questions. Good morning to you all again, and welcome to our quarterly monetary policy report press conference. I am pleased to report that, consistent with Bank of Jamaica's monetary policy efforts and a generally favorable international environment, inflation in Jamaica has continued to ease, reflecting a slowing in the rate of price increases. This should provide some relief to consumers, businesses, and the general public. Annual headline inflation at April of this year, as reported by Statin, was 5.8%, falling within the bank's target range of 4 to 6% for the first time since July 2021. This is a welcome development and a continuation of the general downward trajectory since inflation peaked at 11.8% 1 year ago. Core inflation, which excludes food and fuel prices from the Consumer Price Index, as of April this year also fell, reaching 5.7% from 6.1% at March, and well below the outturn of 8.4% at April of last year. The primary mandate of the Bank of Jamaica and our resolve is to see inflation firmly anchored between 4 and 6% to allow all stakeholders, consumers, businesses, and investors to be able to plan within a macroeconomic environment where inflation is low, stable, and predictable. Notwithstanding the good news to date, there is a risk of inflation again breaching the target temporarily before firmly being anchored in the 4 to 6% corridor. At April, the key external drivers of headline inflation, such as grains, fuel, and shipping prices, continued to decline, and inflation expectations tracked downwards also. As expected, the pace of monetary tightening by the U.S. Federal Reserve Board, the Fed, also slowed, and recent developments suggest that interest rates in the U.S. are at or near their peak. There are, however, inflationary pressures in the domestic economy. Adjustments to selected regulated prices, such as the national minimum wage, recent increases in the cost of communication services, seasonal increases in agricultural prices, as well as pending increases in other regulated prices, such as transport costs, could temporarily lift inflation back above the bank's target range over the next 3 or 4 months. Inflation, however, is expected to trend back towards the target range by the December 2023 quarter. Against this background, the bank's Monetary Policy Committee announced its decision on Friday to hold the policy rate at 7% and to maintain tight Jamaica dollar liquidity in the money market, as well as to continue fostering relative stability in the foreign exchange market. The committee is satisfied that its monetary policy actions since October 2021 have been effective in achieving the objective of reducing inflation, but is of the view that there is need to maintain the policy stance until inflation is firmly contained within the 4 to 6% corridor. What is the evidence of the effectiveness of monetary policy? First, interest rates in the domestic money and capital markets and the term rates offered on deposits by DTIs have generally increased in line with the policy rate, with the DTI sector continuing to make small adjustments to rates on savings and deposits. Second, the flow of new loans to the private sector has also declined appreciably in real terms over the 6 months to March 2023 by 6.5% and generally reflects the impact of higher interest rates and the tightening of credit conditions. Third, the respondents to Bank of Jamaica's quarterly credit conditions survey also indicated that credit terms are expected to tighten further for the June 2023 and September 2023 quarters. Fourth, the maintenance of tight liquidity in the financial system and the occasional intervention of the bank in the foreign exchange market has led to relative stability in the exchange rate, which in turn has had a significant impact on limiting the pass-through of imported inflation to prices in the Jamaican economy. One positive byproduct of this process is that in the context of the stability in the foreign exchange market, deposit dollarization has continued to trend downward. And by deposit dollarization, I mean US dollar deposit dollarization. Let me now discuss the outlook for inflation and the economy in some more detail. Inflation is projected to average between 4 to 6% for the December 2023 and March 2024 quarters, which is lower than the average inflation rate of 6.3% projected for the June and September 2023 quarters. This outlook is consistent with global consensus forecasts for a continuation of the fall of commodity prices. It also considers the bank's overall monetary policy stance and assumes that inflation expectations will continue to decline. The risks to the inflation outlook are balanced. Higher than projected future wage adjustments, a stronger than anticipated impact of climate change on domestic agricultural prices, and a worsening in supply chain conditions could put upward pressure on inflation. Further, higher than projected interest rates among the major developed economies could worsen the interest differential, thereby putting pressure on the exchange rate, which would contribute to higher inflation in the economy. Among the factors that could lead to lower than projected inflation are weaker than expected global growth, which could negatively impact domestic demand, as well as some projected adjustments to regulated prices not materializing. Turning to the outlook for the Jamaican economy. The Jamaican economy continues to grow strongly. Real GDP is estimated to have grown by 3.5% to 4.5% for the March 2023 quarter, a faster growth rate than the 3.8% recorded for the December 2022 quarter. Therefore, for fiscal year 22-23, real GDP growth is estimated in a range of 4 to 5.5%, in line with the bank's previous forecast. There are also signs that the economy continued to expand for the June 2023 quarter, and GDP growth for the 23-24 financial year is projected in a range of 1 to 3%. The bank expects that this growth for the year will be largely driven by the resumption of production at the Jamalco alumina plant, supported by some improvement in agriculture and manufacturing production. Let me speak a bit about the foreign exchange market. The foreign exchange market has remained relatively stable, reflecting in part the actions taken by the bank in response to the higher than targeted inflation. At May 18, 2023, the Jamaican dollar appreciated against the US dollar on a year-over-year basis by 0.4%. This is compared to a depreciation of 3.3% recorded over the same period a year earlier. In this context, for the calendar year to date, BOJ sold approximately $398.3 million US dollars via its BFIXIT facility, and a further US $10 million to selected public enterprises, including Petrojam. When these sales are set against BOJ's purchases, the result is that the bank net purchased $470.3 million US dollars. At May 18, 2023, Jamaica's gross international reserves remained substantial at approximately $4.7 billion US dollars. The bank projects that the gross reserves will continue to remain adequate in the medium term. Despite the recent turmoil in the banking sector abroad, the domestic financial system remains sound with adequate capital and liquidity. Deposit-taking institutions have remained in compliance with prudent liquidity standards, and the quality of the DTI's loan portfolio has remained stable. Ladies and gentlemen, let me conclude. Bank of Jamaica remains committed to achieving its primary mandate of preserving price stability, with inflation being low, stable, and predictable. Low, stable, and predictable inflation benefits all. We are encouraged by the recent downward trend in inflation over the past few months, but are keenly aware of potential risks to that trajectory. The bank will therefore continue to closely monitor incoming global and domestic data to make future policy decisions. Thank you, and I'll now take questions.
Morning, Governor. Just for clarity, recently the BOJ has had reason to comment on companies publishing that they have gotten non-objection to their proposal for their financial holding companies organizing themselves. Question though, what is the current status of these entities that have gotten non-objection, one? And two, can you state of those that have gotten non-objection, how many have gone the further step in getting approval from the BOJ for their financial holding companies being approved by the BOJ?
Right. So I'm going to ask the expert, Dr. Lewis, to speak on that. But just to say, to achieve non-objection, you have to achieve certain minimum standards. It doesn't mean that you have passed the exam, but you have been allowed into the exam room. And generally speaking, companies see that as in a positive way, and they tend to publicize it. And I believe that in all cases so far, they have taken the opportunity to, tell the public, in particular their depositors and persons who borrow from them, that they are at this state and stage with the Bank of Jamaica. Well, let me ask Dr. Lewis to speak more on that process and how many have qualified and how many are in the pipeline, and where are we going with all of this?
Thank you, Governor. So essentially, in Jamaica, there are 8 financial groups in all. So these are groups that contain a deposit-taking institution. And so under the Banking Services Act, they'll be required to apply to the bank for a financial holding company license. But of course, in order to be able to comply with the requirements of the Banking Services Act, several of them have to restructure themselves and organize themselves in a way so as to make themselves supervisable. And that's the process that they apply for in terms of getting our non-objection. So it's typically a non-objection in relation to their reorganization. The state of play is that we have 2 licensees under the financial holding companies framework. They're known publicly, NCBFG and Jamaica National Financial Group. We have several applicants who have come forward and are at varying stages in that particular application process. 2 are in the process and have reached a fair advanced stage in terms of reorganizing themselves. And we have several that have formal applications before us. I don't want to get into the numbers per se at this point because, of course, it's a dynamic process, and I wouldn't want to insinuate that or pre-run the process, which, of course, is deliberated by the supervisory committee, which makes these determinations. So that's essentially the state of play. So essentially, we have 6 outstanding groups which need to be licensed, and all are at either the stage of reorganizing themselves. Some don't even need to reorganize themselves, so it's not mandatory that you have to reorganize. You have to look at the Banking Services Act and make that determination and then apply.
Through you, Governor, if there were any matters that would, based on your observation, would hold up the process moving further, what would those matters be?
It's not a finite list of matters. Some of the issues, though, that come up have to do with ensuring that the group is structured in a way that, from a governance perspective, it puts the obligation and puts the financial holding company in a position to be able to manage, well, first of all, identify risks, manage those risks, and allocate capital accordingly. So that's one. Secondly, so from a governance perspective, is the group transparent? So as a supervisor, you want to make sure that you can see through the balance sheets, not just of the financial holding company, but all the subsidiaries. And so we want to ensure that we have full visibility of the consolidated balance sheet. Some entities are able to demonstrate that, and some aren't. And to the extent that they can't demonstrate that, they have to reorganize themselves. And then there are other matters to do with whether or not they meet the capital adequacy requirements at the group level. And at this point, we're looking at the primary ratio, which is essentially 6% of total assets, total consolidated assets. So there's several criteria. It's going to vary. And like with any licensing process, we have to consider each applicant on its own merit.
Thanks, Judy.
May I speak?
Melon.
Good afternoon.
Melon.
Yes, please.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Good morning. Please go ahead.
Yes, thank you. I am Tenny Miller I'm in the diaspora. I work with we broadcast on a network of about 7 Caribbean radio stations, community stations, forming a whole network of, we call it Urban Caribbean Media, in addition to a television network which is owned by a Caribbean group, as well as we are now being invited to come on the Amazon platform for Caribbean broadcasting. And one of the concerns that the Jamaicans in the diaspora will have, Governor, and I thank you all for the invitation to this press conference, is that Jamaicans in the diaspora would love to know how can we contribute to the stability of inflation in one respect, and also to the whole business of, and in the wider financial sector system for that matter. Could you share with me, please?
I didn't hear the last part of the question.
No, is that how do we want to contribute to the stability of inflation and in the wider financial system?
Yeah, inflation in Jamaica comes from two things. One is imported inflation, that is approximately 70% of most of what we consume gets imported. And so to the extent those prices are high, they come in. If they come in with an exchange rate that is elevated also, then that multiplies the impact on inflation to the common Jamaican, to the ordinary Jamaican. So that's why we focus so much on keeping the exchange rate as stable as possible without interfering significantly in the normal workings of the market, because it is a free market, and 9 out of 10 days the market trades without the Bank of Jamaica being involved at all. In fact, all we do is buy on those 9 out of 10 days. So to the extent that the diaspora even participates in remittances, it helps Jamaica tremendously by giving us a foreign exchange wherewithal, building our reserves. So from that point of view, I think Jamaica is deeply indebted to the diaspora for the contributions they have made over the many years, but in particular in that difficult period 2 to 3 years ago during the pandemic when we experienced a fallout in tourism. And even today, that those flows remain pretty strong. The other source of inflation for Jamaica is within the domestic economy itself. When it gets overheated and price setters feel that they can increase prices because there's so much demand in the economy that they can get away, so to speak, with price increases. Now, that we have to deal with, and we deal with it through interest rates, by raising interest rates and making it a little bit more, tamper down the heat in the economy by taking some of the demand out, making people want to save rather than spend, making it more difficult to borrow to expand. So just like what happens in the United States or elsewhere, that's interest rates at work to kind of keep the economy cool. And that's an important aspect of trying to tame inflation.
Governor, and I thank you for your response, Governor. A follow-up question quickly. Climate change is a major issue, Governor, and members and deputy directors. What impact will climate change have on inflation going forward? And how does the BOJ plan to mitigate that? You know, what into its forecast? How do you plan to include that into your forecast, actually?
Well, climate change does have an important impact on prices. If you look on the rainfall pattern for Jamaica in the last couple of years, you will see a diminishing, generally speaking, a diminishing amount. And that has an impact on agricultural prices. DG Stennett is our resident climate change expert. And I'm going to ask him to say a few words about that impact on inflation, but also Bank of Jamaica's general view on climate change and what it means for the banking industry as a whole and the projects that they fund.
Thank you.
Thank you, Governor. Good morning, everybody. Well, to start from where the Governor left off, climate change has a direct impact on the agricultural sector. However, there is an urgent move afoot by the authorities to make that sector more resilient by infusing better irrigation methods into the sector, better production methods, and so on. Our concern from another perspective is the impact of climate change, broadly defined to mean severe weather, ranging from drought to 1 in a 100-year high rainfall event, hurricanes, and so on, rising sea level. We have an interest in ensuring that the financial sector is appropriately positioned to withstand those risks. So in that context, the bank has just begun a process of understanding the potential impact of climate change on the financial sector to the extent that the sector may be exposed to investments that they themselves are exposed to climate change. And ultimately, our intention is to ensure that we can communicate to the banks what the potential risks to their business operations are from climate shocks, and to ensure that they are appropriately positioned to mitigate the impact of this impending process of climate change. So in general, the bank has two interests, Governor. One is ensuring that the rail sector is resilient to the risk of climate change, and the financial sector, its exposure, is something we want to ensure is protected. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Al?
Good morning, Governor. While on the home front, things look pretty good, inflation trending down, there's a degree of stability, there seems to be trouble ahead coming externally. What contingencies or what could be in place if the war in Ukraine becomes more protracted? We see issues around the debt ceiling in the US. As I said, those are external things, but they will have an impact, no doubt. What's your take on that situation?
Yeah, well, those are two very clear risks to inflation in Jamaica. Let's say the Ukraine-Russia conflict. If grain exports out of Ukraine get blocked again, or if the fighting intensifies such that, you know, those exports can't be done, then yes, it's going to have an effect seriously on grain prices. That's going to affect flour prices in Jamaica right away, agricultural feedstock prices. So we have a really vested interest in keeping a keen eye on it, but that's all we can do, keep an eye on it. We don't have any control over what is happening there. So our fingers are crossed on that issue with the Ukraine-Russia situation. The U.S. Debt ceiling is a big concern for us. We certainly hope it comes to a soft landing during the course of this week, because it is not good for anyone throughout the world to have the U.S. be in a situation where they may default on payments or be unable to make payments. Most of our reserves are held in US dollars, as is the case for most countries in the world. And so we all have that vested interest to see that, or to hope that that gets resolved very quickly. It will be the first time in the US history that they have ever defaulted, and I don't think that Congress wants to really be the Congress that made that happen for the United States.
Governor, I note with interest you didn't include the recent public sector salary increase among those factors that would cause inflationary pressures. Question, is it that you view this as being negligible?
Generally, we think that salary increases will amount to an inflationary impact of about 0.5%. That is our estimate. That's not to say that it can't have an extraordinary demonstration effect that pushes future wage increases beyond what we expect. Right? So sitting as we are here writing this monetary policy statement, we think that it will be about 0.5%. All wage increases will impact inflation to that extent. But we are not sure what if there is any demonstration effect on what impact that might have in the future on wages.
My final matter that I have here has to do with the sandbox. I hear a lot of companies advertising about testing financial services product in your sandbox. Can you give us an update on what's happening with the sandbox? How many companies are operating within the sandbox?
I'm going to hand over to Natalie, who is the expert on that one.
Last time she was nearer to me, she has gone so far.
Oh, are you hearing me now?
Yes,
Maybe
I'm
you could take off your mic.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
Thanks. Right, so let me start over. So we have 23 companies in the sandbox testing either prepaid cards and or mobile wallets. Those are the main products we have now in the sandbox. And the entrance into the sandbox are companies that are already regulated by Bank of Jamaica. And of course, FSC companies may come in with the permission of the FSC to test products. So that's where we are. So it's going very well. What we're not seeing most of is the fintech companies who need to have partnership with DTIs to enter the sandbox. We're not seeing that at all. No.
On your readings of the market, what would account for this?
Maybe not being able to find a DTI to partner with, because most of the DTIs have their own innovative technology arm, so they come in by themselves.
Governor, we're expecting a bumper summer for tourism. I would expect that the receipts on that would be very encouraging for you. How do you see that playing out as an impact for just foreign exchange receipts and the impact for inflation?
Yes, we are very heartened by the projections for tourism for the summer and look forward to that success. Wayne, I don't know whether you want to make some comments on that in terms of growth for the future and whatever else.
Yes. No, as you're aware, the strong recovery in the tourism sector has been one of the key drivers of the impressive recovery in the economy generally. And that has continued into the March quarter. We're looking at strong stopover visitor arrivals growth for March. And we also expect that to continue and to support growth going forward into your June quarter. And the governor gave the estimates for growth in the June quarter. Although we should note, though, that we're really normalizing now, and so one should expect the overall growth in not just tourism, but also the broader economy in terms of GDP on a whole. We're expecting that to normalize back to what we're accustomed to in the pre-pandemic levels. But certainly the recovery in tourism has been a main linchpin in the recovery of the economy, and it has also supported the buoyant flows, that in addition to remittances, has supported the buoyant FX flows that we've been seeing in the foreign exchange market.
Governor, when you take a panoramic look across South America and some of the Caribbean, I'll note in particular Argentina, Chile, Trinidad, you see the foreign exchange market in Jamaica, there's a lot to crow about. What's your take on that when you look across that? What did, say, Jamaica get right and some of these countries got wrong?
Well, you know, all it has taken us a long time to get it as right as it is today. It's been 10 years, maybe longer, where we have tried, failed a bit, tried again. So wherever we are today, which is a better place than we were before, it has taken a long time to get here. But I think that where we are is that Jamaicans are comfortable now, that the macroeconomic variables are positive, meaning that the fiscal side is managed and won't create excess inflation, that the monetary side is managed and is stable, our institutions are strong. So we are in a much better macroeconomic position today than we were, say, 10 years ago. And that has built confidence in Jamaicans so that they are quite happy to earn, maybe save some, sell some, earn again and do the same thing. And so there's a stability and a confidence that permeates the foreign exchange market today that you wouldn't have seen 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And it is really incumbent on us to preserve that stability and confidence.
Thank you, Governor. We have a question online from Shamil Scott of Loop News. Is BOJ still on track to have the new banknotes in circulation by June?
Madam Banknotes.
Okay, thank you, Governor. The answer is yes. We're looking to begin issuance in about the middle of June. And I can say we're going to be doing what we call a partial issuance, as the banks, all the banks are basically ready, but not all the ATMs are going to be ready to accept the new banknotes. So as we speak, the banks are working to retrofit. I mean, think of the large banks, which each of them have about 200 or so ATMs across the island. So it takes a little time, but partial issuance, and the banks will be sending out their communique to their customers as to which ATMs and which branches you can get the new notes as well as deposit the new notes to your accounts.
Thank you, Mrs. Haynes. The question continues. Kindly indicate how the public campaign on the new banknotes has been going and how many groups have been reached.
All right, it's me again. All right, so it has been going well. I mean, persons would see on social media, on traditional media, but in addition, more importantly, we have begun sensitization training sessions here at the bank, and we have started with the large cash handlers in government. So you have your TAJ, your customs, your courts. They are coming in, as well as the financial institutions, on the sensitization on the security features and other features of the banknotes. Pretty soon, where is my communications person? Noel. Noel can best tell you now what is to come in terms of we're hitting the road. We're hitting the road in terms of the communication. So I don't know, Noel, if you'd want to add that.
Thank you, Mrs. Haynes. So just to let you know that in addition to what was shared earlier, we're across all major platforms: television, radio, newspaper. We also just started our mobile advertising route. So if you journey across Jamaica, and for those of you who journey along the route to the BOJ, you would have noticed signs all over. To come, we will be hitting the street within the next couple of days into various parishes. In fact, all 14 parishes, we are actually taking the campaign into communities. So we're going into schools, into the markets, into the public places, just to ensure that our Jamaican people are adequately informed. So that is to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Greenland. Leary Gordon, would you like to ask your question?
Yes. Good morning, Governor.
Senior like Deputy Governor. Face.
Deputy Governors all. I want to first congratulate the Bank of Jamaica team on what appears to be an initial success against the fight against inflation. My question is regarding the bank's cash reserve requirements. There was a move earlier in the year to increase the reserve requirement as a part of the monetary policy tool. I note that both the monetary policy press release and monetary policy discussion is silent on the cash reserves. I haven't mentioned it. Can you provide some guidance, forward guidance on the potential view on the cash reserve requirements for banks? Thanks.
I think we addressed this matter at where was it, the last meeting of MPC, and it became effective the 1st of April. 1st of April. So it's actually implemented. I'm not sure what other comment we can make. The rates have been raised, and the deposit institutions have put the cash with the Bank of Jamaica. So that's a done deal. And that has taken, I think it's 20 billion, how much? Approximately 20 billion of liquidity out of the market, which is really important because we expected quite a tide of liquidity in about May, June, July, which we are currently experiencing. And the cash reserve ratio increase helped considerably in managing that increase in liquidity.
Thank you, Governor. We have 2 questions online, and then we'll take one from Siobhan Campbell. From Keith Collister, can you advise what the current FX restrictions are on the local capital market, raising money in US dollars, and any potential plans to liberalize those restrictions over the next 6 months?
I would ask Wayne to speak on what they currently are. But let me say, just like how we are encouraged to see inflation dip below the 6%, but not sure that we can hold it there, we are encouraged by how stable the foreign exchange market has been. But we need to just be sure that we are well on our way to achieving inflation in that 4 to 6 corridor before we can look at being more liberal in respect of foreign currency capital markets activity. Where we want to see it, we just want to make sure that when we do, increase the potential to have it, that we can manage it without any destabilization in the exchange rate. Wayne.
Thank you, Governor. Well, for any entity that wants to raise foreign currency by way of issuing bonds, we call them exempt distribution. You have to apply to the FSC and also to the Bank of Jamaica, who makes an assessment. Now, if you can recall, when COVID hit and also when we had the Ukraine war and its impact on inflation, we took a very conservative approach to dealing with the issuance of foreign currency instruments because of the impact that it has on foreign currency demand and the foreign exchange market. So we actually required, and working with the securities dealer industry, we'd ask them to exercise a lot more discipline in terms of the amount and the timing of those instruments. We have relaxed that recently. And so in terms of the application process, for issuances below a certain amount, that doesn't necessarily come to Bank of Jamaica now. The FSC deals with that. If it's above a certain amount, it will come to Bank of Jamaica because we have to actually assess the impact on the foreign exchange market because of the size and the timing of the transactions. So we have been a lot more liberal now. In terms of going forward, this is something that we have under constant review. I mean, a part of the requirements is that for regulated entities, they are not allowed to hold foreign currency instruments above a certain proportion of their total assets. And it varies. For securities deals, that's 25%. For insurance companies and pension funds, that's 10%. Going forward, this is something that we have under constant review, and depending on how we see the economy evolving over the medium to long term, depending on how we see the structure of the financial sector evolving and how risk within the financial sector and the broader macroeconomy are evolving, we'll make a determination on that. So the bottom line is that we have sort of eased some of the stringent measures that we had put in place coming out of the COVID and the Ukraine shock.
Thank you, Dr. Robinson. The next question is from Calvin Brown. In light of the impact of climate change on agricultural production and our need to become self-sufficient in food production, is BOJ satisfied with the speed of the present movement towards protected agriculture via greenhouse technology?
That's a tough one. I don't have I don't have an opinion on it because I'm not aware of all that is being done. But I certainly hope that we are doing it seriously because we do need to protect ourselves in that respect.
Thank you, Governor. Siobhan Campbell, please go ahead with your question.
Good morning. Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, we can.
Two questions, Governor. The first one, you spoke to the salaries of the wider public sector, but I'm curious, specifically the increases granted to the legislature and the cabinet. Would this have any material impact on the Bank of Jamaica's inflation target? And secondly, if you're willing, what is your reaction to the increases granted to these two groups?
Well, as a Governor of the Bank of Jamaica, I don't have an opinion to give officially on that matter. That's not for me to say. I believe that when you look on the quantitative impact, I believe I read somewhere it's about 1.7 billion. I'm not sure if that's for 1 year or for the 3-year period. In any event, that's not a very substantial impact from an inflation point of view. So we look at all wage increases in the same way, and our comment on wage increases generally, whether it's a minimum wage, it's a wage increase to civil servants, or the wage increase to parliamentarians, we see it in the same way. That whilst it may be justified to a certain extent, we look at it carefully because it can have inflationary impact, particularly if it has a demonstration effect, which means that persons who were considering, let's say, 10% feel, no, I can ask for 15%. That's what is of some concern to us. But otherwise, wage increases generally at whatever level for whatever group, we think has an impact of about 0.5% on inflation.
Governor, we're coming into the summer months now. How are remittances looking, and do you see an uptick on the previous year?
Natalie?
I'm sorry, Al, can you go again?
Remittances, what's the outlook?
Oh, well, what we are seeing is remittances are still strong, though not as strong as immediately after the impact of COVID in 2021, but they are still at higher levels than we saw like in 2018, 2019. So it's still holding at around, on average, 240 to 250 US million per month.
Would you say that perhaps you're seeing an uptick on last year? This year, that is?
No, not on last year.
Oh.
Not on last year, but definitely higher than 2018, 2019 levels. And the highest we have seen, as I said, is in 2021.
Governor, you spoke earlier with regards to the steps, with regards to the fallout of Silicon Valley banks and those other banks here in the United States. We don't have a window to determine what's going to happen next. Therefore, could you share with me what kind of a safeguard is there in place for financial stability in light of those situations?
Yes, well, certainly when it comes to the DTI sector, for which the Bank of Jamaica has direct responsibility, we have very high standards of capital adequacy and liquidity. Over at the Financial Services Commission, which I now chair, similarly, we are looking very carefully at the various enterprises there. But I would say that generally speaking, the financial sector as a whole, that is DTIs, security dealers, insurance companies, have weathered the worst of the situation and look as if they can manage to get through without any concern on our part. So I am pretty comfortable that the enterprises are sufficiently capitalized and have enough liquidity.
Governor, not a question, but really trying to engage your thoughts, even though I said it was my last. But the whole debate on public sector salaries, impact, and inflation, it just got me thinking. I recall some years ago I was reading some literature which mentioned Jamaica's marginal propensity to save is exceedingly low. And that brought me back to my memory as a child where I was encouraged to save. There was the government savings bank. They set up some system where school children had accounts, or they got accounts, and I had to save with my teacher. Every day I save 1 cent or 2 cents, something like that. But the fact is, Governor, we have a poor tendency of saving. We consume most of what we earn. And it begs the question, what is being done to encourage Jamaica to get back into saving and not just consume?
I will ask Robert to think of that whilst I make a general comment. A big thing that we can do is what we have done, which is to raise interest rates. Because what that does is make it more attractive to save than to spend. And quite a few people have benefited from that. Maybe not the small saver at the big bank, but that is the small saver's decision to stay with that bank and not to go and to find an institution that can give a better rate. So the saver himself or herself has to take some responsibility and be proactive if they want to get a better return and make their savings do more for them. But at 7% policy rate, you can get, depending on how much you have, pretty attractive rates that would match inflation at least, if not even beat inflation. Robert, the propensity to save and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, thanks, Governor. I'm not quite sure right now of the exact number, but from a national income point of view, I think that the national savings rate is in excess of 20%, which I think from any vantage point is a reasonable number compared to international benchmark. You have to recall that Jamaica is a low per capita income economy, and to the extent that you have a large proportion of the population earning fairly low levels of income, then the marginal propensity to consume out of that low income will be small. But from a national perspective, I will update myself on the exact latest number, but I think the national savings rate is not very, very small. But I'll get back to you on that, Durant.
But pardon me, Mr. Stennett, but when one look at the carnival of consumerism which is taking place among the low-income grouping, wouldn't it be advisable that we put in some kind of a measure to encourage the population, especially as the brother pointed out, at the school and other level to begin to save? Would that make sense? I don't know.
Absolutely. And I think that is a mandate that the Bank of Jamaica can and should take up more strongly and will. It's part of our financial inclusion objective. And so once we can take a little bit of our focus off of the hot war with inflation and look more broadly at issues like financial inclusion and school savings programs and so forth, I think that's a good idea, and we will certainly prosecute that.
Yeah. No, sorry, Governor, I should add that's something that we're actually pursuing now under our financial inclusion initiative. We have a very active financial literacy program, and we're putting out a lot of ads and a lot of tips, and one of them is to talk about savings, and not just savings, but also savings and budgeting. And also to encourage more financial inclusion, we're also talking about how do you open a bank account, what can you do to make it easy to open a bank account. So we are focusing on all of those initiatives.
Governor, AI seems to be all the rage these days. How do you see the impact with the banking sector following the move to become more digital? Now we're talking AI. And do you see any way that you can employ AI at the Bank of Jamaica?
Maybe our next press briefing, I won't be here, but AI will be here to brief you.
That's a distinct possibility. I don't know if you saw the interview with Joe Rogan and Donald Trump. It was an AI interview. I don't know if you saw that.
Yes, I mean, it's amazing, the technology. I listen to BBC a lot, and there was a program where this one person spoke, and then they did an AI of him, and they challenged people to say which one was the artificial intelligence, and they couldn't pick it. It was even, you know. So that technology is wonderful if used in the right way, and can be really a serious challenge if not used in the right way. It's yet to be seen what impact that has on how it may be deployed in banking. But you can just imagine that in consumer services, whether in banks or elsewhere, that using it to interact with consumers could be quite good. Instead of waiting in queue for somebody to answer your question, you could have AI instantly answering a question for you in a manner that is interactive. So it's amazing, and it's really wonderful, and I look forward to seeing it.
Good morning. I'm Cody Ann Barrett from Jamaica Observer. Now, on the heels of technology, thanks Al, has the bank given any consideration for regulation to allow for interoperability among the various digital wallets? And will they be able to use Jamdex just like Link?
Natalie. Boy, I'm stoning Natalie with ball today.
All right. So Jamdex is interoperable. And that is the beauty of Jamdex over, like, say, Link, any other e-money. BOJ will not be implementing legislation for interoperability among the other wallets. That's why we have Jamdex. So what we are saying is any wallet provider that provides Jamdex to their customers, they'll be able to do transactions with each other seamlessly and in real time, because it is interoperable.
I think Jide wanted to comment on the AI. Was it AI?
Yeah, just to give another application, I mean, even in terms of fraud detection in financial services, human beings are slow at identifying patterns, especially high-frequency transactions that occur over a very short window. But AI has the ability to ingest all that information, identify abnormal patterns, and shut down transactions. So these are some of the applications that are there. And certainly at the bank, we are encouraging our financial institutions to, where feasible, financially feasible, to apply and engage those types of technologies. And of course, if necessary, we will provide the general principles that they should observe as they engage with the technology. But I don't think there's any way for us to step away from the implementation of AI, in terms of our business processes. So.
Thank you, Dr. Lewis. The next two questions will be taken in the following order. Dashan Hendricks will be able to ask his question, as his hand has been up for quite some time, and then I will read the question from Neville Graham. Go ahead, Dashan.
Good morning, Governor.
Morning, Dashan.
I asked the most weird questions ever, right? And I'll continue along that line. I'm talking about now the labor market dynamics and the output gap as was discussed in the MPC in the February meetings. And part of it where the BOJ is projecting and still seeing labor market shortages being exacerbated in the next couple of years, and giving some recommendations, like one of them talking about increasing the number of hours to be worked as a part of ameliorating the labor market shortage. One looking at, well, presuming if the population grows faster than has been assumed in the study that was done, and 3, if the participation rate among the working age population increases. And I'm trying to figure out, in a period in which discussions are being held, not serious yet, but about reducing the number of days worked per week and or the number of hours worked per week, how would that fit in, and what recommendation? One of the things the MPC minute spoke about was noting that the PR, the participation rate, could rise further if wages increase above reservation rates. What are those reservation rates? And also saying if there are other policy interventions that the government could put in place to incentivize people to return to the labor force. What are those policy interventions that the BOJ has seen and could recommend to provide incentives for people to return to the labor force? Because I'm asking this in the context whereby it's being raised constantly by the BOJ, either in a study or being mentioned in MPCs, which to me suggests that it is becoming a concern on the inflation front. I don't know if I'm right.
Yeah, well, I'm going to ask Robert to make a comment on it. But generally speaking, yes. I mean, anywhere you go, people complain. And businesses, restaurants in particular, the BPO business, complain that they can't get the number of staff that they want. So there is a phenomena out there that is causing the employment to be so high and unemployment so low. And it's not a contradiction when we say we can increase the number of hours worked. I mean, people may not mind working more hours if they are paid to work more hours, you know, at an overtime rate. So it's not a contradiction, but it's just a technical solution, including, you know, encouraging people to participate in the labor force more. But Robert, you're better able to speak on this matter.
No, thank you, Governor. Actually, I think that's the full answer. Tashan, the overriding concern is how to get the population to be more productive as one component of those factors that cause overall production in the economy to rise. And as long as we have a situation where the demand, both domestically and abroad, for Jamaican output of goods and services are rising, this will remain a constant problem. And so all of the things we have been discussing are, I would call them plain vanilla recommendations. We haven't gone into any great detail about what is required on the ground, but our general view is that we just need to shift the production envelope forward, upwards, so that Jamaica, so that the demand-based inflation that we will have experienced recently, both in the labor market and generally, is tempered. But we don't have any, you know, specific issues at this time to discuss. We don't, for example, the specific question you asked about reservation wages, I would just want to suggest that the general state of wages in the economy paid by the major employers do not appear to be enough to incentivize those who are outside of the labor force to come in. So it would simply be a matter of observation to understand what may be required over and above what currently exists now to incentivize more people to work. But this is a national problem, and it's an international problem. It's something that all countries around the world are grappling with, and Jamaica finds itself, unfortunately, at this stage of also grappling with the problem. But we have no specific solutions, and we are going to continue to think about the issue as time goes by. Thank you.
Melanie, if I may follow?
Please go ahead.
Oh yeah, I'm just asking, have you done any simulations as to if the scenarios that you're contemplating plays out, how would that impact inflation? And of course, that would inform the strategies to on what measures you take to try to prevent any significant inflationary impact, given the time in which it takes for our monetary policy to take effect?
Yeah, well, Dashan, we have an idea of what we call the non-inflation accelerating rate of unemployment. We have an idea, and I think there's a paper that's published on our website that gives that number, and it's a number that the technical team updates periodically as we continue to assess what level of employment growth is required and production growth is required in the economy to offset demand-related pressures. So may I invite you, Dashan, to take a look at those numbers. They are publicly published, and we can always talk about further refinements to those numbers. Thank you.
Governor, recently the Prime Minister talked about accelerating a new energy mix and putting it into action fairly quickly. He talked about renewables, but more specifically, he talked about nuclear energy. What are your thoughts, and how do you see that vis-a-vis balance of payments? Are you looking for a certain percentage that you can drop that energy component? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I have no knowledge of the risk, no detailed knowledge beyond that of a layman of the kind of risk involved in nuclear energy. So I can't comment on that. But to say energy is a big, big part of our foreign exchange bill. And it's, since the pandemic, that has risen a couple, maybe $1 billion US or so. That energy bill has risen. So we have a big vested interest in bringing that down. Whether we do so through nuclear power or solar power or hydro or a mix is not my area of expertise. But, you know, Jamaica would do well to have a more stable, low-cost source of energy than importing fossil fuel.
Thank you, Governor. There's a question from Neville Graham. What is the comment on the soundness of Jamaica's financial institutions given recent problems in the U.S. and post-SSL jitters?
Yeah, so just to say again, our assessment is that in the deposit-taking sector, which is a sector Bank of Jamaica has direct control over, the capital adequacy is good and the liquidity is good also. And these are numbers that Dr. Lewis looks at regularly and that we discuss. So I don't have any issue with that. Over on in the non-DTI, the non-banking sector, the security dealers and so, with my recent affiliation with the FSC, I feel also satisfied that what we see in the numbers indicate good capital adequacy and good liquidity too. So we feel fairly comfortable with what we are seeing and the numbers that come into us very regularly. And I don't feel particularly concerned about any institution out of the normal. So, you know, like here and there may be differences and so forth, but generally speaking, the financial sector is good, strong, well capitalized with good liquidity.
Thank you, Governor. The follow-up question, have stress tests been performed and what is the outlook?
Yes, we in the DTI sector do stress tests regularly. Jide, I wonder if you want to address that issue.
Sure. Well, you know, the stress tests that we've been looking at, interestingly, Jamaica has been going through stress tests, not hypothetical ones, but actual ones. And I think the litmus test really is the fact that we have weathered the last 2 years and entities have been able to use up their capital buffers. Where appropriate, they have continued to be able to lend. That's the DTI sector, in spite of the headwinds. And they, as the governor pointed out, have continued to be able to be liquid, meaning having enough assets on hand that they can treat with any liquidity outflows. So the results of the stress tests that have been shared with the supervisory arm indicate that the sector remains robust. Clearly, what has happened over the last 2 years is that we have moved from a situation of heightened credit risk to more of a market risk centric exposure. But the financial system, as the governor has pointed out, has been absorbing those risks well and demonstrate the signs of it being able to continue to provide their services to the public as their licenses afford them. So that's the summary of where we are now in terms of stress test exposures.
Thank you, Dr. Lewis. A question from Calvin Brown. CARICOM wants to reduce the import of agricultural produce into the region by 25% by the year 2025. Has the bank bought into this concept, and if so, are you, the BOJ, monitoring Jamaica's movement towards this objective given the potential benefits to the economy?
In terms of benefit to the economy, if we are currently importing, let's say, rice from the United States or China versus importing rice from Ghana, from a kind of border point of view, I don't think it makes a difference. We'd like to know that we are fostering growth in our region for sure, but from a strict foreign exchange point of view, I don't see a difference from where the rice or any other commodity comes from if it is not coming from out of our own domestic economy. But I'd be happy if Jamaica and the CARICOM region could and would trade with each other more, and that it was economically the right thing to do. That would be a wonderful thing to happen.
Thank you, Governor. The final two questions, Siobhan can ask his, and then I'll read the one from Keith Callister. Please go ahead, Siobhan.
Good morning again, Governor. I'm curious. We are now at 7% for the policy rate from the Bank of Jamaica. What would it take to return to the extremely concessionary half a percentage point rates that we used to enjoy?
Well, that is the question of the morning, right? How do we get back to 0.0 to 0.5? First of all, we are going to have to feel confident that we are firmly within the 4 to 6% corridor. And what does that mean? It means practically, when we look internationally, that we see relative stability in commodity prices, in the geopolitical situation. Some people may say, is that ever possible? Well, maybe there is a new normal that we'll have to absorb. But because of the very large impact that those prices have on inflation for us, we have to pay attention to what is happening internationally. Domestically too, and just as importantly, we have to be sure that there is not excessive demand pressure building up in the economy to drive inflation. So until we are satisfied that that is the situation and we are confident that we can stay in that 4 to 6 corridor, I don't see us stepping back from the 7%. And of course, when we do step back, we're likely to do so gingerly or in small steps. But, you know, we want growth, and if growth means that you can borrow cheaper than you currently can, well, certainly that's an objective that we are bought into and we would like to see happen. But our number one priority, our number one mandate is to manage inflation. And to the extent that the 7% is helping us to, we're going to stick with that. Whenever in the near future we feel we can step back from the 7% and still have inflation in that 4 to 6% corridor, we will do so then.
Thank you, Governor. The last question from Keith Callister. It seems incredibly difficult to open a new bank account to the small saver to be able to move to get these higher interest rates. Where are initiatives such as NIDS or the simplified account opening procedures?
Well, thanks for that question, Keith. Well, as you're aware, the government is well advanced in terms of the rolling out of the NIDS framework. But also many years ago, the government introduced reforms that allow for simplified KYC accounts, that is simplified Know Your Customer accounts. And that would based on the assessment of the risk that a saver would present to an financial institution, that simplified KYC allows a financial institution to apply or require less information. So whereas before you would probably require 3 references, 2 utility bills, and probably 3 identification, with simplified KYC, what you mostly need is probably 1 means of identifying yourself and some confirmation about your income. So there is in place a mechanism for a more simplified means to open accounts with commercial banks. But of course, the commercial banks themselves have to do this sort of risk assessment.
Melanie, if you allow me, I just wanted to ask Wayne if he would speak very quickly on the whole business of the Twin Peaks and what we are doing, in particular the cooperative relationship we have with the FSC and trying to elaborate the implications of it, as well as the technical assistance that we are getting, international technical assistance.
Okay, thanks, Governor. Well, as you're aware, the government earlier this year signaled and indicated its shift in its policy to transform or reform the regulatory architecture of the country. What we have now is a regulatory architecture in which the supervision of the financial system is focused more on an institutional basis. And what the government has decided is that they want to shift the focus to more on the purpose of regulation. So there are 2 broad purposes for regulation. One, prudential, which is about safety and soundness. The other is about market conduct and consumer protection. That is how the financial institution interacts not just with the customer, but how they interact among themselves and how they, how they behave in their dealings with each other and in markets. So the Twin Peaks model is about that, structuring your regulatory architecture so on one peak you focus on the safety and soundness of a bank or any financial institution, prudential, and on the other peak is where you focus on consumer protection and market conduct, the sort of relationship aspect of financial intermediation. So Bank of Jamaica and the Financial Services Commission, since then, we have been actively working on setting out the different components that will allow us to implement this new Twin Peak model, which would not be unique to Jamaica. A number of countries have this Twin Peak model, such as Australia, the United Kingdom, the Netherlands, South Africa. And so we have been working closely with the FSC in terms of a number of different working groups, looking at a number of components. The key component, of course, is the legislative framework. So that involves looking at the raft of legislation that governs both the supervision of deposit-taking institutions and also non-deposit-taking institutions, and also your pension funds and insurance companies. Recall, under this new regime, prudential supervision of all financial entities will be done by the Bank of Jamaica. So the supervision of securities dealers from a prudential perspective, which is currently being done by the FSC, will come to Bank of Jamaica. Similarly for insurance companies. The new FSC will continue their supervision of these entities, the securities dealers, insurance companies, pension funds, and they will also have supervision of the deposit-taking entities, but their focus will be on market conduct and consumer protection, whereas our focus will be on prudential. So we have been working in terms of looking at the reforms to the legislation that needs to be put in place. We've also been looking at the institutional arrangements as well. How do we restructure the prudential supervision within Bank of Jamaica, how do we standardize that now across both securities dealers, insurance companies, and deposit-taking institutions? So we also have to look at how we actually would go about it, not just the bank, but also the new FSC. What are the human resource requirements? What are the technology requirements? What are the even spatial requirements? How do we house people? Because you imagine that we will be expanding staff complements across both institutions. So there are a number of issues that we have to look at, and as the governor indicated, we are receiving technical assistance from the IMF and the World Bank, and we're also contracting consultants to work on specific elements of the implementation plan as well. So it's a lot. The government has given us 2 years to implement this. That is a very tall order, certainly by international experience, but in collaboration with the FSC and with the assistance that we're getting from our multinational partners, we are working assiduously at it. And as time goes on at an appropriate point in time, we'll provide further updates, and of course the minister will also provide some updates on that.
Thank you, Ian. We consider this to be a very, very important project for us over the next 2 to 2.5 years, and we'll be putting a lot of work into it.
Okay, we've come to the end of the press conference. I'd like to thank you all for joining us and for participating, and wish you all a good day. Thank you.